You know, one of the questions when you plant anything, when you start anything for the Lord, or when you're following the Lord in anything, obviously the first deal is just a matter of following Jesus. You're doing this because Jesus told you to do this. You're doing this because you want more of Jesus. But it breaks down into two things. The first thing is kind of institutional, like what do we want to do? You know, what do we want to do as a church? And obviously one of the major things we want to do as a church is to support an orphanage. We want to start regional churches, or churches within the region. We want to open a biblical counseling center where we're able to exert the truth and the fire of God's Word in people's lives in a way that the power of God changes their hearts and things are fixed. And there's a lot of those things that we want to do. But on the other hand, the question is, who do you want to be? Who do you want to be as a church? Because that's the ultimate question. If a group of people have to be something in order to get there. And for many years, as I prayed through this process, I began to realize that Jesus, as he was dying on the cross, had a vision for the people that he was founding that was a heroic vision. A vision of people who would follow him in a radical way, or whatever it meant, because they loved him that much. Not because it was the right thing to do or whatever, because they loved him that much. And I began to study church history and look at what were the components of a heroic church. Who were people? What were the people like in a heroic church? Because there have been movements throughout history where people have they've stood out, churches have stood out as heroic churches, groups of people that have done what was necessary to follow Jesus in a really radical, history-making kind of way. And I saw three components in a heroic church that kind of umbrellas everything else. And this has to do with who we want to be. The first one is that there are people under authority. People who can be heroic and risk-taking are people who know that no matter what happens, they're in the hand of God. That no matter what befalls them, no matter what mistakes they make, you see, they're not afraid of making mistakes, for instance. Not that they want to make mistakes, but they know that if they do, that God's there, that it's going to be all right. Heroic people in the church have always been people under authority. They've been under the authority of the sovereignty of God. They believe that nothing happens apart from God's will, that God is completely in charge, and that God's sovereignty is the most important aspect of our foundation for theology, that we understand that God is completely in control. They've been under that authority. They've been under the authority of the Word. They believe that the Word not only is perfect, that it's without error, that it's reliable, but they've also believed that the Bible is sufficient. And what that means is that they've had the authority of the Bible in every area of their life. You know, one of the issues of biblical counseling, if you're not familiar, which most of you are, but one of the issues that biblical counseling deals with is that it reasserts the authority of the Bible into people's emotional problems emotionally and mentally. It says, you know, we believe the Bible actually has something to say about someone's depression, for instance. Or we believe that the Bible actually has something to say about someone dealing with something about being diagnosed as bipolar, or someone dealing with marital problems and things like that. So the authority of God's Word, the sufficiency of God's Word, the authority of Jesus in people's lives. These are people who live under these umbrellas of authority. They have the authority of the church in their life where they are exhorted into good works through the church. They have the authority of a godly male leader in their home. You know, there are all these different levels of where you see a heroic group of people, you see a people under authority. Of course, we're taught to think the exact opposite, that people under authority are oppressed. But actually, people under authority are freed. Because when you're under authority, and that authority is gracious yet sovereign, you have the power of God to propel you into the dangerous frontiers of radical obedience. And you have the love of God to catch you when you screw up. So when you're under the authority of God, you have the power and the love to do whatever He calls you to do and to live life to its fullest. So authority is huge. The other aspect that you see in a heroic congregation is the issue of pilgrimage. That is the idea that they understand that they're moving from point A to point B, that they're starting here, but they're not supposed to stay here. They live a life of pilgrimage. They live a life of pilgrimage in their spiritual lives. They say, okay, I was saved, but I'm not supposed to stay a baby Christian. I'm supposed to grow into Christ's likeness. I'm supposed to move forward. That's my ultimate goal. They understand that this world is not their home. They're living for a better country. And so they don't value this world like they value the next world. And people on pilgrimage living under authority begin to invest in the next world while they're living in this one. And so you see people that are under authority, and you see people that are in pilgrimage. That is, they understand and their values and their desires and their goals and their rewards, all that stuff is set up in the future. And then you also see people, these people under authority on pilgrimage, that are also very generous people. And I don't mean generous like they give lots of money, because most of the people in church history who were heroic didn't have any money. But they were generous with their home. They were generous with their food. They were generous with their health. They were willing to go to places where getting sick was an almost certainty. David Livingstone, as he was marching up Africa his final time, he was going to die. He just had so many diseases. He had sacrificed. He was generous with his body in order to reach people for Jesus. The heroic person is someone who lives under the authority and has this idea of pilgrimage, but it's also someone who is very generous. And why are they very generous? Because they enjoy God's generosity. They understand that nothing they have is their own, that nothing they have has been earned, that it's not their right to have it, and that whatever they have is from God's hand. And so they're able to look at every situation in life, and they believe that Romans 8:28 is true, for instance. They believe that all things are, through Christ, turned to good for those that love Him, are called according to His purposes. And so the person who is living under the authority and on pilgrimage also says, well, yeah, I'm going to be generous. Why wouldn't I be generous? Why wouldn't I be generous with my time? Why wouldn't I be generous with my home when there's someone in need? Why wouldn't I be generous with my life? The first time I got on an airplane to fly to Africa, I don't like to fly at all, obviously for spatial reasons, and other things as well. But I'm always scared of it. And you know what? I remember taking off and thinking, you know, what if this plane just crashed right now? People would laugh. People would shake their heads and say, can't believe that. Can't believe he traded his life for what? Nothing. But then I took it to one step further and said, well, let's say this plane lands, and I leave one orphan to Jesus, and then I die. Most people would still see that as it's a tough deal there. Chris, a father of 3 kids and a wonderful and loving husband, and you know, all of this stuff, and man, he's just, you know, going over to Africa for 1 kid. You know, here's the thing. We don't see our lives the way God sees them, and He sees them like Kleenex. They're good for 1 use. And then when He's done with them, He's done with them. And obviously, He doesn't throw us away into the trash bin of eternity. We're blessed to be with Him forever. But we need to see our lives as disposable, because that's what they are. We ought to be generous with our lives, generous with our safety, generous with our comfort, generous with our convenience, and say, you know what? Whatever needs to happen, needs to happen. Because I live under the authority of a God who is both utterly in control and utterly able to love me when I mess up. And I'm not even living for here. I'm living for there. I'm on pilgrimage. And so I'm able to enjoy and echo the generosity of God.